Chapter 12, Into the Unknown. The air inside the refuge was thick with tension as Lyra, Zara, and Dr. Thorne made their final preparations to leave. The weight of their mission pressed down on them with every moment that passed. The device, Thorne's creation, rested in a secured case, ready to be transported to the main resistance base. Its significance was immense, representing humanity's last hope in their battle against the alien invaders. Lyra stood by the entrance, her eyes scanning the darkened landscape beyond the refuge's walls. The world outside was a desolate wasteland, the remnants of a planet that had once thrived. Now, only the strongest survived in the shadows of the alien occupation. She couldn't help but glance down at Shadow, who was sitting silently by her feet, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Ready?" Zara's voice broke the silence, pulling Lyra's attention back to the task at hand. She nodded, adjusting the strap of her pack over her shoulder. "Let's get moving. The longer we stay here, the more vulnerable we are." Dr. Thorne stepped forward, cradling the case with the device as if it were a newborn. "We have to keep this safe at all costs," he reminded them, his voice laced with urgency. "Without it, everything we've fought for will be lost." With a final glance at the refuge, they stepped out into the night, the cold air biting at their skin. The landscape was eerily quiet, the only sound being the crunch of their boots on the barren ground. The three of them moved swiftly and silently, each one acutely aware of the dangers that could be lurking in the shadows. They had been walking for hours, navigating the twisted remains of what had once been a thriving city. The streets were lined with the skeletal remains of buildings, and the occasional rustle in the wind was the only sign of life, if one could even call it that. Despite the desolation, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her hand instinctively hovered near her weapon as her eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a low growl emanated from Shadow. His ears were perked, and his glowing eyes were fixed on something in the distance. Lyra froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Zara and Thorne immediately stopped, their eyes following Shadow's gaze. In the darkness, a faint movement caught their attention. A group of figures, barely visible in the dim light, were advancing toward them. "Get ready," Zara hissed, drawing his weapon. Lyra followed suit, her senses on high alert. The figures moved with a deliberate grace, their forms shifting in and out of the shadows. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as they drew closer. They weren't human. Their elongated limbs and the strange, ethereal glow surrounding them marked them as something otherworldly. Without warning, the figures lunged at them with lightning speed. Lyra and Zara fired their weapons, the night erupting into chaos. But these creatures were unlike anything they had faced before. They moved with unnatural agility, dodging the bullets as if they could predict every move. Amidst the frenzy, Shadow suddenly darted forward, his sleek form a blur as he charged toward the creatures. Lyra's eyes widened in shock. "Shadow, no!" But before she could react, one of the creatures swooped down, snatching Shadow up in its long, clawed hands. The cat let out a piercing yowl, his body writhing in the creature's grip. Panic surged through Lyra as she watched, helpless, as Shadow was carried off into the darkness. "Shadow!" Lyra screamed, her voice breaking with desperation. She took off after the creature, her legs burning with the effort to keep up. Zara shouted after her, but she barely heard him over the pounding of her own heartbeat. The creature moved with inhuman speed, weaving through the ruins with ease. Lyra pushed herself harder, her determination fueled by a mixture of fear and anger. She couldn't let them take him. Not after everything they had been through. But no matter how fast she ran, the distance between her and the creature only seemed to grow. Finally, she skidded to a halt, gasping for breath as the figure disappeared into the darkness, taking Shadow with it. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. He was gone. Zara and Thorn caught up to her moments later, their faces etched with concern. Lyra, we have to keep moving, Zara urged, placing a hand on her shoulder. We can't stay out here. It's too dangerous. Lyra shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears. But Shadow, they took him. I know, Zara said gently, his voice filled with sympathy. But we have to focus on the mission. Shadow would want us to finish what we started. Thorn stepped forward, his expression grim. Those creatures, they weren't like the others. They were something different. We need to figure out who, or what, they were, and why they took Shadow. Lyra swallowed hard, her mind racing with questions. Why had they taken him? And what did they want with him? The thought of losing him was unbearable, but she knew Zara was right. They had to keep moving. For now, the only thing they could do was continue toward the main refuge and hope that they would find answers along the way. With a heavy heart, Lyra turned away from the darkness where Shadow had disappeared. The night was far from over, and the journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty. But as long as she had a breath left in her body, she would fight to bring him back. They pressed on, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. The road ahead was long, and the shadows that loomed over them seemed to grow darker with every step. But somewhere in the distance, Lyra could still feel a faint connection to Shadow, a glimmer of hope that he was still out there, waiting to be found.